Okay, so, oh yes, we've got this Pizza Express thing up there. Why is that Pizza Express up there? In what remote way is that instructive in relation to what we've been doing? Hmm? No Likert scale. Why? How is it remotely relevant to what we're doing? Well, it's very relevant to what we're doing, actually.
It's influencing the way you by giving you a positive label.
Yeah, it's designed for children, you know, while they're waiting for pizzas to come out, so they don't drive their parents mad. They've got something to do. Think questionnaire design. I'll help you a bit. Think questionnaire design. Look at the design.
You can't be both word starter.
Yes, you've got, okay, how did you score? 1 to 2, word starter. All right. 2 to 4, wordsmith. So if you score 2, what are you? Are you a word starter, which is 1 to 2, or are you a wordsmith? That's quite sad that when I go to a pizzeria, these are the sort of things I pay attention to, but it's just in my blood. Come on. That's all right, that's okay. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. While you're working hard, I'll have some biscuits. Now, this is probably designed by the chef, you know, and so we can forgive that. But this is a very common error in questionnaire design, overlapping categories. And the last one is okay, 9 to 10, but all the others are overlapping. 2 appears twice, 4 twice, 6. It's a very basic error to avoid in questionnaire design. The place I see it most is in the question about years of experience, which might say, you know, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. You shouldn't have the overlap. Okay? So that's why it's there. That's why it's there. So I collect these when I see them. Okay. So still on the issue, just to wrap up the issue of enhancing quality, quite a few of the questions you asked me this morning were along the lines of how do I improve the quality of this? How do I improve the quality of that? And hopefully we're addressing most of those. Shall I blank this so you're not trying to make words? You can do it later. It's Pizza Express. It's easy to remember. On page 11, I'm not going to talk through this now because it's late in the afternoon, and I just want to highlight it for you. On page 11, you have quite a long list of suggestions for improving quality in collecting and analyzing data. Several of these we've mentioned as we've worked through this. So the first one there, minimizing reactivity. If you remember, reactivity is people changing their behavior because they're being observed. So we can't eliminate that. How do we minimize it? Okay, etc., things like so. Things there to think about. Designing instruments carefully. Then there's a list of suggestions for enhancing analysis. Some of these are obvious, like avoiding subjective interpretations, using the right tests. Avoid inferences not supported by evidence. We've talked about that one, haven't we? Avoid equating correlations and causes. Correlation is not cause. That's a basic thing. And avoid selective use of data. This is something we're a bit naughty sometimes as researchers. We use the data which suits us, and we accidentally forget about the data that doesn't suit us. That's selective use of data. That's a no-no. And then the last group are specifically about qualitative research. I know a couple of people asked specifically about qualitative research this morning. So things we can do to enhance the quality of qualitative research. Prolonged engagement is not waiting a long time until you get married, okay? Prolonged engagement is, any guesses? Yes, it's collecting data over a period of time. So, you know, if you're working with a teacher, if you observe them once you're going to get a very limited picture of what they do, but you've observed them maybe once a week over a month, that's more prolonged. Or interviewing a teacher once versus interviewing them a few times. Prolonged engagement increases the validity of the data and hence the quality of the study. There's this one, triangulation, which you may have come across a few times. I think I've got a picture here. Let's skip that one. Triangle. I think there's a picture on the next page as well. You've got that picture. Triangulation simply means collecting data from more than one source. Collecting data from more than one source. Because that gives you more confidence in your conclusions. Okay? So if I spoke to 3 people, and they more or less said the same thing, that gives me more confidence in my conclusions than if I spoke to 1 person. You can also have triangulation by using different methods as well. But the idea is not to rely on a single source or a single type of data. Okay, and as you've got that picture there. It gives us more confidence in our conclusions. And the only other one I'll mention here is this participant validation, also called member checking. This is quite common in qualitative research. And all it involves is, let's say you've interviewed a teacher a few times, you've done some analysis, and you've come up with some conclusions about this teacher. With member checking, you go back to the teacher with maybe a summary of your conclusions, and you say to them, what do you think about this? Do you relate to this? Have I captured you appropriately? Okay? And they might say yes, they might say, well, so have you misinterpreted that, or whatever. So when the respondent confirms that our analysis has sort of captured their reality appropriately, that adds validity to the findings and hence quality generally. So this is particularly for qualitative research. Okay, you don't do this with statistics. This is for qualitative research, member checking. So that's all I'm going to say about those. I'll leave you to read more about those as required, but there's quite a sort of summary of strategies you can use to improve the quality of research overall, okay? And that allows us to move on to the last thing we need to do today, which is to focus a little bit on quality in reporting. If you remember earlier, we said quality in planning, quality in doing or conducting, which includes collecting and analyzing, and quality now in reporting. And I think, as I said earlier somewhere, what we think about the quality of our work counts for very little, because ultimately we're judged by others. We're judged by an audience, whether they're readers or whether they're audience listening to us. The judgment is made by someone else. So if we think our work is great and no one else does, of course, our opinion counts for very little. So we need to be thinking about that audience. How do we persuade them? Okay. So just a few points I made earlier, and this grid here you've got on page 12 just reminds you of that. Reporting or sharing or dissemination, whatever you want to call it, can take place in different ways. It can be informal or formal. There's a scale there of formality. And it can be oral or written. And you can actually think of different things to put in each box. So you can give an informal talk to colleagues at school about your work. That's informal, and that's oral. And that's fine. You've shared it with someone. Okay? If you present at a conference like this, it's oral, but a bit more formal. Maybe if you went to present at a conference somewhere else in the world, maybe a bigger conference, maybe more formal. Written and informal, what would that be? How can we think of an example of sharing our research in written form, but informally? Yeah, through a blog, for example. Through a blog. So if you're writing about your research in a blog, you're not going to go into all the detail of what you did like you would for a journal paper. You'd maybe just write a couple of paragraphs, a very accessible summary of what you did and what you learnt. Okay? That's quite a common way. It's quite a common strategy for sharing research these days. Of course, if you go for the academic paper, the journal paper, that's writing, which is more formal. So the point to restate is that reporting doesn't just mean writing formally. There are many different types. And my advice to people is always start with something easier, and then if you want to build your way up. So people write to me sometimes and say, I've just started doing this research, or I've just finished this research, and it's my first study, and I'd like to publish it somewhere. And then they go on to say, and I'm thinking of sending it to TESOL Quarterly. Now, TESOL Quarterly is the top journal in our field. The top journal, maybe TESOL Quarterly, Applied Linguistics, joint top. It's incredibly difficult to get published in TESOL Quarterly. Incredibly difficult, even for experienced researchers. So, when a novice comes to me and says, that's what I'm aiming for, I sort of suggest, well, that's good, but maybe to start with, and to help you build up confidence and learn the ropes, maybe you can be a bit less ambitious. So I think a good strategy is to start with easier targets, and then to work your way up. It's like saying if you're going to give a presentation for the first time at a conference, don't go to a mega conference with thousands of people. Find something local, supportive, and then you build up your confidence and skills from there. Okay. Okay, a few notes at the bottom of the page there, on page 12. There's another link to something that's on my website. I've put a document on my website which is called 20 Tips on Giving a Research Talk, which you may want to check out. Okay? So just some very practical advice about things to do if you're presenting research to enhance your chances of doing it well. So that's all I'll say about that. Papers do very often get rejected. Okay? Papers submitted to journals do very often get rejected. For the top journals, the rejection rate can be as high as 90%, 93% for the top journals, so it's extremely competitive. But even less competitive journals, their acceptance rates might be 50%, 60%. So lots of papers get rejected. And so what I just spend a little bit of time on now as we conclude, I don't want to conclude on a depressing note, of course, but it's an important issue, is just trying to understand why this happens. Why is it that papers get rejected? On page 13 and 14, I've written down some examples of comments written by reviewers, most of them written by myself, about papers which I've been reviewing. And maybe it's a reflection of me, but most of the papers I review don't get published, but that's another matter. But these are actual comments I've written about papers I've been asked to review. And what I'd like you to do, quite quickly, don't get too bogged down in this, okay, because it's late and all of that, but just skim them. And the question is, what is it that the reviewer was unhappy with? What problem in the paper is the reviewer highlighting? Okay? So do this quite quickly with people next to you to help out. And we're doing this to highlight reasons why papers don't get published, okay? And this is relevant to our focus on reporting. So skim through those as quickly as you can. And the question is, what is the problem being highlighted? So as I heard, I hope that wasn't too depressing reading. But these are examples, real examples of the kinds of comments that researchers get on their papers. And they are instructive in the sense that they highlight issues that reviewers are not happy about. They highlight issues that are seen to be detrimental to the quality of the paper. Now, by far, the most common criticism of papers relates to the methodology, what we call the methodology section. In other words, when we write a paper, we are expected to describe what we did, how the study was done. And we're expected to describe that in enough detail for the reader to understand what we did. And by far the most common criticism is lack of detail in that section. In other words, you read the paper and it somehow goes from literature review to results without anything in between, explaining how data were collected, how data analyzed. And you can see this quote here, again, the same one, same article I quoted earlier, She said the most common problem is insufficient information about participants, about setting, research design, method, program. Insufficient attention was given to methodological rationale. The methodological rationale is not just describing what you did, but justifying what you did. So saying, I used the questionnaire is describing what you did. Saying, I used the questionnaire for these reasons is justifying what you did. And we need both. We need both. Not just a description of what we did, but a justification. And this is by far the most common problem in papers that get rejected. They don't give enough information about what the researchers did. Now, if we don't tell our readers what we did, how do we expect the reader or the audience to make a judgment about the quality of our work? You know, if I don't know what you did, I can't judge the quality of what you did because you haven't told me. If I can't judge the quality of what you did, I will judge it, of course, negatively. So it's in our interest to be as explicit, as transparent as possible in explaining to people what we did. Now, warning, if you're talking about research orally at a conference, you don't go into huge amounts of detail. A, because you don't normally have time, and B, normally that's not what people have come to listen to you for. They've come because they're interested in the topics, in the results. This here we're talking about is to do with written papers. Okay, when you're writing, we need to make sure we provide detail. So, several of the comments here, I think, relate to lack of detail. But let's just highlight one or two other issues that you spotted in those comments. So let's just highlight one or two other issues that you spotted in those comments, which were noted by reviewers. Would anyone like to pick on one that they found particularly exciting? Maybe exciting is a bit overambitious for this time of the afternoon, but you know what I mean. C, yes. I'm still, the reader is left with the sense that much of what emerges here is not particularly novel or surprising. For example, some of you will know I've been doing research on teachers' beliefs for many years and how beliefs relate to what teachers do. It's clear that there is a connection between teachers' beliefs and what they do. So when I spend, an hour reading a paper, and at the end they tell me that there is a connection between teachers' beliefs and what they do, my reaction is, yeah, but we've known this for many years. So what are you telling me that's new? And particularly if you're aiming for a competitive journal, that is important, that you're extending knowledge in some small way, not just repeating what we already know. Okay. Any others you want to single out there? E. Yes. The reviewer asks, why precisely were interviews and observations chosen? It is not enough to say they were chosen because they seemed appropriate. Yes, this is slightly amusing. We talked about you need to say what you did and justify what you did. But the justification has to be convincing. The justification isn't, I chose an interview because it was appropriate. That's not a justification. Okay, that's what was the case there. We need a bit more. B talks about, refers to coherence, which is important, of course, in writing, in any type of writing, but especially in academic writing. Connections between different sections were not evident.
I read some papers, and in terms of their format, they ask two questions, but in the finding section, they don't make it clear which question are they answering. Okay. They just put all the data together in the finding section, and at the end, they don't refer to any questions they asked initially. What I understand, there should be some, in the finding section, you should say that this is the question I asked initially, and this is the data that is relevant to answer.
Yes. If you started off by answering questions, it's reasonable to expect an answer to those questions to be provided, and some indication of what the answers are, yes. Very often these are organizational issues. They're there somewhere, but buried, and it's very often a question of just reorganizing the text, which isn't a sort of a fatal problem. It can be fixed.
I feel that the author or researcher is not aware of that. I mean, like, you know, that he or she should relate to
Yes, yes. The reader may not, the writer may not be aware of it, and hopefully the feedback they get will make them aware of it, and so that to help them revise. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So quite a wide range of reasons there, okay, which can give the impression that quality is lacking at the reporting stage. But as I said, the good news generally is that most of these can be fixed. If it's a problem of organization or coherence or lack of detail, these are things you can go back and fix. As we said earlier, the ones you can't fix are the problems of methodology related to instruments and all of that. But hopefully those won't occur very often. So I think now we should get into our final review, okay, just to recap on what we've done today, to see if there are any outstanding questions to look at. I have looked through your questions from this morning. I just want to say one or two things about that. A big pile of these are asking questions about, not a big pile, a pile of these are asking questions about teaching. Questions about teaching. About how I can engage students, or how I can find appropriate activities for students, or how I can motivate students. So earlier in the day, we mentioned different flavors of research. You know, the more academic research, the more practitioner-oriented research. And I think these kinds of questions are ones that can be addressed when teachers use research in their classrooms. So if you're interested in strategies for motivating your students, I obviously can't stand here and give you an answer to that. But research, in terms of teacher research, gives you strategies for investigating that. In other words, you can design simple research projects in your own classrooms with your own learners, where you try out different ways of motivating them, and you systematically evaluate how they're responding, and through that process, you develop a better understanding of what works. Okay, and we haven't had time to go into detail, but if you're around on Saturday when I give my plenary talk, will be the focus of it. It will be about teacher research rather than research more generally. So quite a few questions to do with things in the classroom, making decisions in the classroom. And I think teacher research gives you strategies for answering such questions. I'm just going to have just a selection of other questions. I haven't chosen these because they're particularly good or bad, or I think they're representative. And I think we've addressed some of these. A question here about deductive and inductive approaches to research, which is more important. I think the point we've made is they are strategies that are available to us, and we need to decide which is more appropriate, depending on the type of work we're doing. So if you're working qualitatively, you're more likely to work inductively. Okay? So it's not a question of better. A question here is utilizing material on the internet research. Does that count as research? It depends on what material it is we're talking about, doesn't it? It depends on what material. As I said this morning, when I ask teachers if they do research, they very often say yes. And when I ask for examples, they say, we look for activities online. And that's not the kind of research we're talking about today. So my general answer is searching online. Research, I would say no. But that needs to be clarified. A few of you asked about how can we make sure, I'm sort of paraphrasing a few questions here, how can we make sure that the information we collect is reliable or valid? And I think the answer is we can never be completely sure. I mean, we can never be completely sure that someone's telling the truth, for example. You know? So that's why the strategies we talked about, they allow us to increase the likelihood that we're getting valid data by working with people over a longer period of time, or if we're interviewing people, helping them to relax, putting them at ease. All of these strategies together, thinking carefully about our questions. Collectively, they increase the likelihood that we're getting valid information. We can't ensure validity, but we do our best to maximize validity. Okay, we try to maximize it. We can never ensure it in a total sense. Okay. There was a question about analyzing qualitative data. We haven't really gone into the specifics of analysis, either quantitative or qualitative. Last month, no, in August I was in China. We did a 3-day workshop just on qualitative research. And I think we dedicated a day and a half to analyzing qualitative data, so it's quite a big topic. I think what we've said here today is that qualitative analysis tends to be inductive. Okay, we tend to work from the data to our themes. I think that's really the only point we made about qualitative data analysis today. Okay. And here's another one. How can I ensure accuracy of my research? It's not about ensuring. We can never ensure in a sense of 100%, but we adopt strategies to make it as reliable as possible. Okay, on page 14, there's a quick review for you, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that now. You don't have to follow these questions slavishly, of course, and if you don't feel like doing those questions, you can talk about something else related to the day. But the key issue here is, just think back over what we've done, think about questions you're taking away, think about key issues for you that you're taking away, think about what you might want to share with colleagues, okay, and how you might want to try and get them engaged or involved or interested. Okay, so there's the general drift of those questions. And at the bottom there, any other thoughts, ideas before we conclude. And then before we leave, we'll have just a quick round to make sure everyone has the chance to get anything they need off their chest before we leave. Okay, just a few minutes to do that review with someone next to you, and then we'll conclude.
I came here doubting whether I was going to waste one day's work. Honesty is the best policy. But I felt it was a day very well spent.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I have to thank you for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah. That's not the sort of comment I was fishing for, but it's still very, still very, very welcome. Thank you very much. So I don't have anything else to add. So if you're satisfied that you've said all you need to say, I think the only thing I need to say is to thank you for working hard today. I know it's a long day, and I hope there are some useful things you can take away with you, share with colleagues, and use in your own work. Okay, so thank you very much again, and I hope to talk more with some of you over the next couple of days.